My son watched me hit the floor and told his wife not to stop. The fall hurt, sure. But it was the way Blake looked at me that stayed with me. Like I was some old tool he had dropped and no longer needed. I was lying on the slate floor of my own mudroom. Blood sliding into my right eye. The ceiling light splitting in two above me. Blake opened the back door for Tessa. "You're fine," he said. "Sleep it off." Then the door shut. The garage groaned open. Their headlights crossed the wall, and they left for their 8 Andros Steakhouse reservation, while I bled on a floor I had laid with my own hands 19 years earlier. My name is Walter Mercer, though most people in Cedar Rapids still call me Walt. I am 69 years old. For 34 years, I ran Mercer Mechanical Services, fixing boilers, chillers, busted pipes, and every expensive problem buildings can hide behind clean walls. I started with a rusted-out service van, a set of wrenches, and one 200 my father loaned me. I sold the company for $315 million. That money became this house, 3 duplexes near the community college, a self-storage lot, and a 4-unit commercial building on Collins Road. My wife Elaine died from ALS 5 years ago. After that, the house got quiet enough for bad people to sound like family. Blake was 36 when he asked to move in just until things leveled out. Iron Ridge Smokehouse was bleeding money, he said. Meat prices were up, payroll was tight, and the landlord, meaning me, could afford to be patient. The restaurant sat in one of my commercial units, and Blake promised he only needed 18 months to get his cash flow straight. Tessa sat beside him at my kitchen table, touching his wrist every time he looked ashamed. She told me family was supposed to help family. That line works better on a widower than most people understand. By month 6, my house no longer felt like mine. Tessa had replaced Elaine's curtains without asking. Blake parked his truck in my side of the garage. Their boxes filled my workshop. They ate my groceries, hosted football Sundays in my living room, and spoke to me like a retired man should feel grateful to be included in his own home. When I asked about the 5 months of unpaid restaurant rent, Blake said I needed to stop thinking like a mechanic and start thinking like an investor. Then the brochures started showing up. Willow Creek Assisted Living, Prairie View Senior Residence. Tessa never handed them to me. She just left them where I would find them, then asked soft questions at dinner. Was I still comfortable driving at night? Had I noticed the stairs getting harder? Wouldn't it be easier if someone else handled the properties? They were not worried about me. They were building a story where I was too old to own my own life. The night everything broke open was a Tuesday in January. The kind of Iowa cold that makes metal door handles bite your palm. I had spent the afternoon at one of the duplexes near the community college, replacing a failed igniter in a furnace because the young couple renting the place had a baby, and I was not going to let them wait until morning for heat. When I came home, Blake was standing in the kitchen with a manila envelope on the island. Tessa sat at the table with her legs crossed, one hand resting on her phone, calm in a way that told me this was not a conversation. It was a presentation. Blake said we needed to talk about the future. Inside the envelope were 4 sets of papers: a quitclaim deed for my house, transfer documents for the duplexes, control assignment for the self-storage lot, and paperwork giving Blake managing authority over the commercial building on Collins Road, including the unit where Iron Ridge Smokehouse operated and the 3 other units whose tenants had never missed rent. He wanted everything signed that night. I looked at my son and asked him what exactly he thought had happened to me that made him believe I would hand over a lifetime's work because he brought office paper into my kitchen. He did not yell. That was the first thing that made my stomach go hard. Blake had always raised his voice when he was scared. This time he stayed soft, almost professional. He said I was getting older. He said the properties were becoming too much. He said I had been forgetting things, though he could not name one thing I had forgotten. He said one fall, one lawsuit, one bad tenant could wipe out everything Elaine and I had built. Then he used the word liability. Not about a cracked roof, not about a bad lease, about me. Tessa leaned forward and said this was about love. She said no one was trying to take anything from me. They were trying to protect me from the stress of managing it all alone. I told them I had managed those properties for years without missing a tax filing, a repair deadline, or a mortgage payment. I told Blake that Iron Ridge still had a sign on the door, only because I had carried 5 months of unpaid rent and ignored every late-night excuse he had given me. I told him the building he wanted control of was not his rescue boat. It was mine. That was when Tessa stood. She came around the island fast enough that I did not step back in time. Both her hands landed flat against my chest. Then she shoved. My heel caught the edge of a stool. My shoulder clipped the corner of the island, and the back of my head hit the slate floor hard enough to flash white through my vision. For a second, the whole room pulled sideways, then warmth opened above my right eyebrow and ran into my eye. I heard Blake say her name, not like a son watching his father bleed, like a man warning his wife she had made the plan look messy. I said, "Blake." My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. He looked down at me, then picked up the envelope from the floor. "You're fine," he said. "Sleep it off." Tessa was already moving toward the garage. Blake tucked the papers under his arm and opened the back door for her. "We have an 8 o'clock reservation," he said. "We'll talk tomorrow when you're ready to be reasonable." Then the door closed, the garage lifted, and my son left me bleeding on the floor of the house I had built to grow old in. I did not panic. That may sound strange, considering I was on my own floor with blood in my eye and my son's taillights leaving the driveway. But panic is a young man's luxury. I had learned that at 44 when a rooftop unit slipped off a crane sling and took me down with it. 2 cracked ribs, a torn shoulder, and enough pain to make the world go white. What I learned then was, simple pain comes in loud, but it does not stay in charge unless you let it. So, I breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth, slow enough to make the room stop swinging. The cut above my eyebrow was bleeding hard, the way face wounds do. My shoulder burned where I had clipped the island. My head throbbed with each heartbeat, but that was not where my mind went. My mind went to what Blake did not know. Most people in Cedar Rapids knew me as an old mechanical contractor who had done well enough to retire. Blake knew me as his father, which apparently meant a soft target with a checkbook and a house he could eventually take. Neither he nor Tessa knew what I had done 2.5 years earlier to keep Iron Ridge Smokehouse alive. Back then, Blake had come to me at this same kitchen island with red eyes and shaking hands. The restaurant was 6 months from closing. He owed $225,000 on a restructured SBA loan. He was behind with his meat supplier, behind on payroll taxes, behind on rent to me, and too proud to admit he had already borrowed against Tessa's retirement account. He said he was going to lose everything. I believed him. But I did not write him a check. A direct bailout does something poisonous between a father and a son. The son remembers needing it. The father remembers giving it. And sooner or later, shame turns itself into resentment. So I spent 3 days with my attorney, Graham Whitaker, creating a Delaware LLC called Prairie Anchor Holdings. On paper, Prairie Anchor looked like an outside investor with quiet Midwestern money and no interest in public attention. It purchased a minority stake in Iron Ridge Smokehouse and guaranteed Blake's restructured loan. The funds moved through enough clean channels that no one looking casually would ever see my name. Blake called me the day the deal closed. He sounded alive again. He said, "Dad, somebody finally saw what this place could be." I told him I was proud of him. I let him believe the rescue came from strangers because, sometimes, a man needs to feel chosen by the world, not carried by his father. What Blake never read carefully was Section 9. Graham had written it at my request. If Blake, Tessa, or any principal connected to Iron Ridge became involved in fraud, assault, elder abuse, coercion, or criminal conduct, Prairie Anchor had the unilateral right to call the loan, terminate the guarantee, and seize collateral. That meant the smoker rigs, the walk-in freezer, the bourbon inventory rights, the POS system, the leasehold interest, and the Iron Ridge name itself. Graham had looked over his glasses when I asked for that clause. "You expecting trouble from your boy?" he asked. "I'm hoping I'm insulting him by preparing for it," I said. Now I was bleeding on my slate floor, and Blake had just answered that question for both of us. I moved my left hand slowly toward my jacket pocket. The motion sent a hot bolt of pain behind my eye, but I got the phone out. My thumb left a red smear on the screen before it unlocked. Graham answered on the second ring. I told him I was on the mudroom floor with a head wound. I told him Blake and Tessa had walked out. I told him to activate Section 9 of the Prairie Anchor Agreement immediately. Move the duplexes, the self-storage lot, and the Collins Road building into the Mercer Legacy Trust before morning, and call an ambulance to my address. He was quiet for half a second. "How bad is the head?" "Bad enough to document cleanly," I said. "I'll handle it." I hung up, pressed my sleeve against my eyebrow, and listened to the empty house settle around me. 9 minutes later, I heard sirens. The ambulance took me to Mercy Medical a little after 9. A young officer met me in the emergency room after the nurse cleaned enough blood away to see the cut. He asked what happened. I told him I had slipped coming in from the garage and caught the island on the way down. He wrote it down. But his eyes did not believe me. The EMTs had photographed the floor. It was dry. The bruise forming across my chest looked like 2 hands had landed there, not gravity. The officer asked twice if anyone else had been in the house. I said I was alone. 8 stitches. Mild concussion. Overnight observation. I answered every question like a tired old man with nothing to hide, because that was exactly what Blake and Tessa needed to believe. They arrived the next morning at 7:40. Tessa came in first. Carrying coffee she had not asked whether I could drink. Her face was arranged into concern. Mouth soft. Eyebrows pulled together. The whole performance polished enough that a stranger might have believed it. She sat beside my hospital bed and took my hand. "Walt, we were so scared when we heard," she said. "When we heard, not when we left you." Blake stood near the window in a navy jacket, arms folded, staring out at the parking lot like the answer to his guilt might be written between the cars. He asked how I felt without looking directly at the bandage above my eye. "I'm still here," I said. That made him blink. For 4 minutes, they played family. Then Tessa reached into her leather tote and pulled out the envelope. Same color, same shape, same smell of printer ink and bad intentions. She placed it on the rolling table beside my bed and said the accident had proved what they had been trying to explain for months. The house was too much. The rentals were too much. The storage lot was too much. She said stress had made me careless, and carelessness at my age could become dangerous. Blake said nothing. Tessa opened the envelope. The same transfer documents were inside: the house, the duplexes, the self-storage lot, the Collins Road building. But now there was a 5th document: medical power of attorney. It gave Blake authority over my healthcare decisions if I was deemed unable to make them myself. Tessa touched my wrist and lowered her voice. "This is not taking anything away from you," she said. "This is making sure you're protected." I looked past her at my son. Blake stared at the window. That told me everything I needed. I picked up the pen. My hand shook a little, partly from the concussion and partly because even when you know a snake is a snake, it still hurts when it bites with your child's face. I signed the first page, then the second, then the third, then all the rest, slowly, carefully, like a man too exhausted to fight people who claimed they loved him. When I slid the packet back, Tessa smiled before she remembered not to. Blake finally turned around. "I'm glad you came to your senses, Dad," he said. Tessa kissed my cheek. Blake squeezed my shoulder, right where the bruise was darkest. They left 20 minutes later with my signatures, my silence, and the confidence that they had finally won. When the hospital door clicked shut behind them, I waited until their footsteps disappeared down the hall. Then I reached beneath the folded blanket at my hip and took out the burner phone Graham had sent over with one of his junior associates before sunrise. My thumb still had dried blood under the nail. I sent one message, signed, "They're gone." Graham replied less than a minute later. Trust recorded 12:07 a.m. Assets protected. By the time Blake and Tessa walked into my hospital room, the house, the duplexes, the self-storage lot, and the Collins Road building had already been transferred into the Mercer Legacy Trust. I no longer held them in my personal name. Graham's firm administered the trust, which meant Blake's new power of attorney had nothing meaningful to reach. The deeds I had signed were worthless. There was nothing left for me to transfer. What I had given them was not property. It was confidence. And confidence, in people like Blake and Tessa, always makes them careless. Blake went straight from the hospital to Iron Ridge Smokehouse and started talking like a man who had inherited a kingdom. He told his kitchen manager they were finally going to expand the patio. He called his accountant about opening a second location on the west side. He asked a commercial broker what the Collins Road building might bring if the right buyer came along. By Wednesday night, he was already spending money he did not own from property he did not control. Thursday morning, a payment to his meat supplier bounced. That was when he logged into the loan portal and saw the red banner. Account restricted. Contact lender. Prairie Anchor Holdings had called the loan at 8:00 a.m. the previous morning. Iron Ridge Smokehouse owed $418,000 immediately. The guarantee was terminated. The credit line was frozen. The smoker rigs, walk-in freezer, bourbon inventory rights, POS system, leasehold interest, and Iron Ridge name were placed under legal hold pending audit. The bank notice cited Section 9. It also referenced an active case number. That case number came from the hospital's mandatory elder abuse referral. The nurse had filed it after looking at my injuries, the dry floor photographs, and the bruising across my chest. Graham had already provided the detective with recordings from my kitchen audio, the garage camera, and the back entry sensor. Every voice, every timestamp, every second between Tessa's shove and my son walking out the door. Blake did not know that yet. He spent Thursday calling the bank, the SBA, his attorney, and anyone else he thought could make consequences negotiable. Every answer came back the same. The clause was valid. The loan was due. The collateral was frozen. And somewhere in the middle of all that panic, my son still believed I was just an old man in a hospital bed who had signed away everything. Blake called me Thursday evening. I let the phone ring 3 times before I answered. He did not ask how my head was. He did not ask whether I remembered the floor, the blood, or the sound of my own son leaving the house. He went straight to the thing that mattered to him. Dad, something's wrong with the restaurant financing. The word wrong almost made me laugh. He said Prairie Anchor Holdings was acting aggressively. He said the lender had frozen everything. He said someone had triggered a clause that could destroy Iron Ridge Smokehouse before the weekend. Then he said, "Do you know who's behind Prairie Anchor?" I looked out the hospital window at the parking lot below. "Yes," I said. "How?" "Because I was Prairie Anchor Holdings." The line went silent. I counted 11 seconds. Then Blake said, very quietly, "Dad." I told him the clause was in Section 9 of the original guarantee agreement. I told him he had signed it 2.5 years ago when he was too relieved to read the parts that protected the person saving him. I told him my kitchen audio, garage camera, and back entry sensor had recorded Tuesday night from the shove to the door closing behind him. I told him the detective already had it. I told him the district attorney would be in contact. Then I told him I loved him. That part was not strategy. It was the worst truth in the whole conversation. I loved him enough to save his restaurant without taking credit. I loved him enough to let him believe the world had chosen him. I loved him enough to keep his pride intact when his business was drowning. But love had not made him honest. Love had not made him decent. Love had not made him stop when his father was bleeding on the floor. You tried to take from the man who had already given you more than you knew, I said. Now you can live with what that means. Then I ended the call. The following Monday, 2 uniformed officers arrested Tessa at a med spa on First Avenue while she was halfway through a facial treatment. Blake was taken at Iron Ridge Smokehouse, which already had a bank notice taped to the front glass. The dining room lights were off. The smokers were cold. 3 employees watched him walk out in cuffs. At the preliminary hearing, Blake's attorney tried to argue that the financial arrangements made the case complicated. The judge watched 42 seconds of footage. That was all it took. Tessa was denied bail pending evaluation. Blake's bail was set at $175,000. He could not make it, for a man who had spent years talking like he was building an empire. He left court with nothing but a public defender, a frozen business, and the sound of his wife crying behind him. Blake pleaded guilty that spring. 3 years in Iowa State Prison. Eligible for parole after 18 months. Tessa took her chances at trial and lost. 4 years. The recording did not leave much room for charm. I did not attend either proceeding. Graham went for me and sent short updates by text, the way men do when they understand that too many words can become another kind of injury. While Blake and Tessa learned what consequences felt like, I learned how to walk without flinching. My physical therapist was a former Marine medic named Cal, a square-built man with no patience for self-pity and a talent for knowing exactly when pain was useful and when it was just pain. 3 mornings a week, he made me move my shoulder, steady my balance, and rebuild the trust between my feet and the ground. By April, I could walk 5 miles along the Cedar River without a cane. The scar above my right eye turned thin and pale. I stopped combing my hair to hide it. A scar is only shameful if you believe the person who gave it to you had the right. Iron Ridge Smokehouse never reopened. The Collins Road space sat empty for 7 weeks before Graham brought me a tenant application from a woman named Nora Fields, an Iraq veteran who wanted to open a breakfast counter and training kitchen for veterans coming home, with no clear place to land. She had a business plan, a sharp pencil, and the kind of direct eyes I trusted. I gave her a 5-year lease at a reduced rate. By the end of summer, there was a line out the door most mornings. The old smokers were gone. The smell of bourbon and burnt excuses had been replaced by coffee, biscuits, bacon, and people saying good morning like they meant it. Nora hired 2 veterans the first month and 3 more before Thanksgiving. On Thursdays, she kept the corner table by the window open for me. She told her staff it was reserved for the landlord. I told her once that she did not have to do that. She said, "I know." So I stopped arguing. The guest room at the end of my hall is still empty. Some days I think about turning it into a study. Other days, I think about putting my old workbench in there and teaching neighborhood kids how to repair things instead of throwing them away. I have not decided. There are some rooms you do not fill just because they are vacant. Blake will be eligible for parole in several months. I have spent more time than I want to admit thinking about what I will say if he writes, or calls, or stands on my porch one afternoon looking smaller than I remember. I have found no sentence that fixes both sides of that door. He had a father who loved him enough to secretly fund his dream for years, and somehow, that still did not make me safe with him. I do not know what would have been enough. I am 69 years old now. I walk 5 miles every Tuesday and Thursday. The duplexes stay rented. The storage units are nearly full. The commercial building earns more than I need, and the extra goes into a local veterans housing fund under Elaine's name. What I learned on my own floor that January night was not that family can betray you. I already knew the world was capable of that. What I learned was worse. Loving someone does not mean they are safe. And a man who built his life from a rusted van, borrowed tools, and $1,200 knows something useful about ruin. If enough of you is still breathing, you can build again. It turned out I had more than enough left.